Okay, Discourse 9, which is on Brahma beholding the divine abode of the Lord, and Brahma is taught by him the text of the Bhagavata, consisting of 4 couplets only, the seed form of the Bhagavatam. Sri Shuka said, even as a man can have no connection whatsoever with the objects like seen by him in a dream, so can the soul that transcends all material sheaths and is consciousness itself have no connection in reality with the phenomena of this world, O king, except through the Lord's Maya. It is on account of this multiformed Maya that the spirit too appears as endowed with diverse forms. And when he begins to take delight in the material objects of sense, he develops the feeling of I and mine. Rid of all delusion, however, when he begins to revel in the glory of his own self, which is beyond the realm of time and beyond Maya, he discards both these notions, I and mine, and transcends the 3 gunas. I now proceed to expound the truth which the Lord was pleased to teach Brahma in order to enlighten him on the essential character of the spirit, while revealing to him his own divine form in approbation of his true penance. Meaning basically that Brahma had earned this degree of spiritual revelation through the tapasya that he did on the lotus. Sitting in his own abode, meaning the lotus from which he had been born, that primal deity, the supreme preceptor of all the 3 worlds, Brahma Deva, began to meditate with intent to proceed with the work of creation. But he failed to obtain the vision which is regarded as valuable for this purpose, and with the help of which the creation of the phenomenal world could be taken in hand. The vision being a holistic understanding of the whole work of creation that he was going to attempt. He didn't quite have the whole thing in his mind's eye. While he was yet absorbed in thought, Brahma once heard near him in the causal waters a word of 2 syllables, the 16th and the 21st letter sounds among the 25 hard consonants. That's tapa, uttered twice. So here tapa, tapa. It is this penance, O Parikshit, the penance tapa or tapas, which is known to be the wealth of men of renunciation. On hearing this word, Brahma looked about in all directions, eager to behold the speaker. But failing to perceive any other being, he resumed his seat on the lotus once more, and taking it to be a sound advice, set his heart on penance, as if enjoined, meaning as if instructed. That foremost ascetic of all those given to austere penance, endowed as he was with unfailing vision, controlled his breath and mind, subdued his senses of perception as well as his organs of action, and with a composed mind practiced for a period of 1,000 celestial years, meaning 360,000 Earth years, if you were to use that system of measurement. For that long practiced penance, which illumined all the worlds, meaning within his mind, illumined the worlds within his consciousness, and made him understand how he was going to create them. Pleased, the Lord fully revealed to him his own supreme abode, higher than which there is no other realm, nay, which is absolutely free from afflictions, bewilderment, and fear, and which is extolled on all sides by highly enlightened souls who have been blessed with his sight. Neither rajas nor tamas, nor even sattva mixed with either, prevails there. The all-destroying time, too, is powerless there. And even so Maya. How then can the progeny of Maya, like attachment or greed, find their way into that realm? Nay, the attendants of Sri Hari who reside there are adored by the devas and the asuras alike. Possessed of a transparent... sorry. Got a little audio. Okay. There we go. Possessed of a transparent, swarthy complexion and lotus-like eyes, clad in yellow, most charming to look at and extremely delicate of body, they, the attendants of Sri Hari, who reside there, are all endowed with 4 arms, highly resplendent themselves, and further beautified by gold ornaments set with superb shining gems. So when the translation here says a transparent, swarthy complexion, there are descriptions in later in the Bhagavatam and in other shastras and by a long tradition of Vaishnava gurus and Goswamis and such of this skin color that's being described, which is the skin color of Narayana or of Krishna, as well as of his devotees who have attained Salokya Moksha and dwell in Vaikuntha. The transparent swarthiness, it's described as looking almost black. And in fact, sometimes it is called black. But transparent in a way where there's like a deep blue sheen described as looking like a monsoon cloud inside it. As if like if their skin is in sunlight, the sunlight sinks into it a little bit. It's like slightly translucent. And the blue is not on the outside. It's like brought out like a sheen. It's a look that's very different from any human appearance, and very beautiful. Some of them, some of the devotees, instead possess the hue of corals, cat's eyes, or lotus stalks, and are adorned with brilliant earrings, diadems, and garlands. Glittering all round with rows of brilliant and glorious aerial cars of exalted souls, which are further illumined with the splendor of most charming ladies, that divine realm shines like the sky with its line of clouds accompanied by flashes of lightning. Endowed with a most lovely form, Sri, the goddess Sri, adores in that realm the feet of the Lord in many ways with her other manifestations, Bhudevi, Leela Devi, and so on. Sitting in a swing, she sings the exploits of her beloved Lord, while her own praises are sung by the bees at the time. Brahma beheld there the protector of all his devotees, the Lord of Sri, the enjoyer of sacrifices, the omnipresent ruler of the whole universe, being waited upon by the foremost of his personal attendants, Sunanda, Nanda, Prabala, Arhana, and others. Ever disposed to shower his grace on his servants, he bears nectar in his look and wears a gracious smile on his countenance. He has reddish eyes, is adorned with a crown and earrings, is ever clad in yellow, and can be easily distinguished by his 4 arms, as also by a golden streak borne on the right side of his chest, on his right breast, as a symbol of goddess Lakshmi. That universal Lord occupies an excellent and most valuable throne, is surrounded by his 25 Shaktis, or potencies. These are manifest goddesses embodying the spirit, Prakriti, the Mahatattva, which is like the primal matter, the ego, the mind, the 10 Indriyas, the 5 subtle elements, and the 5 gross elements, each embodied in a personal form. And he is endowed with his 6 eternal and divine attributes: lordship, righteousness, renown, prosperity, wisdom, and dispassion, all each of them in infinite proportion, which are incidental in others. In other words, other beings may possess any of those attributes to a finite extent, but he possesses all of them to an infinite extent. He constantly revels in his own blissful existence. Brahma's heart was flooded with rapture at the sight of the Lord. The hair stood erect on his person, and tears rushed to his eyes due to excess of love. The creator of the universe bowed to his lotus feet, which are attained by pursuing the path of the Paramahansas. The Lord, who had evoked Brahma's love, was delighted at heart to see his beloved Brahma standing before him in a suppliant mood, full of love and joy, and fit to receive his commands for the creation of living beings. He took Brahma by the hand and then addressed him in accents illumined with a gentle smile. The Lord said, "With the knowledge of all the Vedas stored up in your heart, you have thoroughly pleased me by your prolonged penance carried on with the intention of creating the universe. Hypocritical yogis can hardly please me. Ask of me, the bestower of all beings, your cherished boon, and you will be blessed." The hypocritical yogis comment is saying that spiritual practice or tapas like that carried on without sincerity of intent, going through the motions doesn't count. He's praising Brahma for having been sincere and genuine in the sankalpa that he set and the way that he performed his sadhana. Ask of me, the bestower of all blessings, your cherished boon, and you will be blessed. The pains that men take for the good of their soul, O Brahma, reach their fruition in my sight. You practiced such supreme penance only on hearing my command in the lonely waters. That is why you have been blessed with the sight of my divine abode, according to my wishes. I commanded you on that occasion only because you did not know how to proceed with the work of creation. Penance, or tapas, is my very heart, O sinless one, while I am the very soul of tapas. It is by dint of tapas alone that I create this universe, and through tapas I maintain it, and it is through tapas again that I absorb it. Nay, my strength consists in tapas, which is hard to practice. Brahma said, O Lord, you dwell in the heart of all beings as the witness, and know by your unobstructed wisdom what I intend doing. Nevertheless, my master, grant one request of this humble practitioner, that I may be blessed with an insight into both the absolute and relative aspects of your formless being. Even as a spider spins a web round itself, sports in it, and then takes it back into its mouth, so do you, O Madhava, of unfailing resolve, through your own Maya, multiply yourself in the form of this universe, maintain it, and then dissolve it all by yourself, possessed as you are of manifold powers, and thus carry on your sport, assuming various forms as and when necessary. Pray, therefore, bestow on me the insight by which I may be able to know how you do all this. Let me unwearingly carry out your instructions, O Lord. Nay, while carrying on the work of creation, let me not, by your grace, be attached to it. Since you have acknowledged me as your friend, as any other friend would, O Lord, let me not be puffed up with pride, thinking that I am immune from birth, etc., so long as I remain engaged in your service in the form of creating living beings, and, unperplexed in mind, classify the jivas. The Lord said, do you receive the most esoteric knowledge, as well as the realization, which is going to be imparted by me about myself, as also the truth of devotion and all that is accessory to it? By my grace you shall have true knowledge about me, as to how great I am, what is my essential character, in how many forms do I manifest myself, what virtues do I possess, and what are my doings. Prior to this creation, I alone existed, and that too in my absolute state. Other than me, there was nothing gross or subtle, nor the cause of both, prakriti. I exist even after creation as well, in the form of this phenomenal world, and I am also that which remains after this has disappeared. That which makes it possible for something inexplicable to appear in my being as apart from me, without any corresponding reality, just like the illusion of a second moon, meaning the moon reflected in water or in a mirror or something is an illusion of a second moon, and which obscures my being, even though I am present everywhere, like the presence of the planet Rahu in the midst of the other luminaries, since among the other planets in the solar system, Rahu is not a physical object, but just a shadow, should be regarded as my Maya. Even as the gross elements may be said to have entered all living beings, both great and small, after their creation, and they can as well be said not to have entered them, in that they already inhered in them as their material cause. Similarly, I can be said to have entered the bodies of these living beings as their indwelling spirit, and I can equally be said not to have entered them, because when they are viewed spiritually, there is no reality other than the spirit, i.e. myself. So there was nothing other than me for me to enter. It was just all me, is what he's saying. He who is eager to know the truth of the spirit should inquire into and ascertain that reality alone, which is proved to exist everywhere and at all times. Whether you argue by the negative process, excluding everything else as not that, or neti, that's a Upanishadic philosophical approach, or by the positive method of affirming everything as that. Establish yourself fully in this doctrine of mine through perfect concentration of mind. By doing so, you shall never be confounded while creating the diverse forms of life in the course of the various kalpas. Sri Shuka continued, Having thus instructed Brahma, the supreme ruler of all created beings, the unborn Lord Sri Hari withdrew that form of his, while the former, Brahma, stood gazing with wonder. Brahma, who represented all beings, bowed with joined palms to Sri Hari. In other words, represented all beings. He bowed on behalf of all beings, since all beings at this time were still within him. And so, through Brahma, all beings bowed with joined palms to Sri Hari, who had now concealed his perceptible form. And Brahma created this universe as before, meaning as it was in the previous Kalpa. Eager to secure the good of all created beings, Brahma, the Lord of creation and the protector of righteousness, once practiced the various forms of self-control, or the yamas of yoga, and the niyamas, with a view to achieving that end which he regarded as his own purpose. O king, the great sage Narada, who was the most beloved of all his sons and an eminent devotee of the Lord, and was eager to know the Maya of Bhagavan Vishnu, the Lord of Maya, waited upon him as an obedient servant and fully gratified his father by his good conduct, modesty, and self-control. Finding his father Brahma, the forebearer of the entire creation, pleased, the celestial sage humbly asked him the same questions that you have asked me. Delighted, Brahma repeated to his son this very Bhagavata Purana, containing 10 distinctive features, which was taught to him by the Lord himself. Narada, O king, imparted the same to the sage Vyasa of boundless glory, while the latter was meditating on the supreme Brahma on the bank of the river Sarasvati. I shall presently tell you, in the form of the same Bhagavata Purana, in reply to your questions on the subject, how this universe emanated from the cosmic being, and answer all your other questions too. Thus ends the 9th discourse in Book 2 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 10 on the 10 characteristic features of the Bhagavata. Sri Sukha continued. Sarga, Visarga, Sthana, Poshana, the Utis, the Manvantaras, Ishanukatas, Nirodha, Mukti, and Asraya. These are the 10 topics discussed in this Bhagavata Purana. Men of true knowledge aver that the first 9 topics have been discussed in this Purana only in order to present a clear conception of the 10th or last, since the last topic is the all-supporting Brahman. This they have deduced in some cases from the actual words of the text itself, and in other cases from their purport, meaning that is not explicit in the Purana, but it is the commentary of the sages. The creation of the gross and subtle elements, the senses of perception and the organs of action, and the mind, the ego, and the Mahatattva, which is the principle of cosmic intelligence, or also the principle of the primal seed of matter, which are one and the same. Due to disturbance in the equilibrium of the 3 gunas, or modes of prakriti, brought about by the will of God, has been spoken of as sarga. So he's defining those 10 subjects. And the creation of animate and inanimate beings by Brahma is called visarga. The triumph of the Lord is known by the name of sthiti, and the Lord's grace on his devotees is termed as poshana. Again, the virtuous conduct of the saintly manus, who preside over the different manvantaras, different cycles of time, has been referred to by the term manvantaras. While the latent desires of the various creatures which lead to their bondage through interested action are known as utis. Even so, the life accounts of the various manifestations of Sri Hari, as well as of his saintly devotees, supplemented by various other stories, have been termed as ishakatas, literally meaning stories of the Lord. Nirodha means the withdrawal of the individual soul with all its qualifications or adjuncts into the Lord, subsequent to his retirement into the state of yoga nidra. And when the jiva relinquishes its assumed character and realizes its true nature, they call it mukti, or emancipation of the soul. Finally, that from which are known to proceed the creation, preservation, and dissolution is what they call the asraya, which is spoken of as the Supreme Brahman, or the Paramatman, the Supreme Spirit. The same perceiving subject, the individual soul, which identifies itself with the sense of perception, also exists in the form of the deities presiding over the senses of perception, the sun god and others, a different one for each sense, the sun god for sight. While the physical body, which distinguishes the senses from the deities presiding over them, serves as the condition, the upadhi, of the individual soul. When it is clear that in the absence of any one of these, we cannot perceive the other two, meaning without the soul who is the perceiver, without the deva who is the process of perception, and without the body, without any one of those, we cannot perceive the other two. It follows that he who knows all these three is the asraya, or support of all, and this latter has no other support than himself. When the aforesaid cosmic being emerged from the egg-shaped universe and stood apart from it, he began to look out for a foothold for himself. And with this object in view, that being of pure intentions created the holy waters. Having evolved from the supreme person, called Nara, which means person, or human, these waters were known as Nara, meaning of Nara, or that which proceeds from Nara. And since he lived on these waters of his own creation for 1,000 celestial years, 360,000 earth years, he became known as Narayana, he who resides in the Nara, dweller in the primal waters. The gross elements, karma, time, the mutability of matter, and the jivas, exist only by his grace and cease to exist the moment he grows indifferent towards them. Awaking from his yoga nidra, Lord Narayana, who was all alone, now sought to multiply himself, and by dint of his maya split up his effulgent seed body into three parts, the Adhidaiva, the Adhyatma, and the Adhibhuta. Hear now how the unitary energy of the Lord came to be divided into three parts. When the cosmic being bestirred himself, there arose from the space within his body, meaning the mystic space within his heart. It's a whole part of the subtle body discussed in the Upanishads and in other scriptures. So there, from within him, there arose the acuteness of the senses, strength of will, and strength of body as well. And from these sprang up prana, the chief of all the vital airs. Just as the attendants of a king follow the king, even so the senses in all living beings are active when this prana is active, but cease to be active the moment this prana becomes inactive. In other words, the moment you are deprived of any breath, your senses stop working, you lose consciousness. With the free movement of the prana, the cosmic being was overcome with hunger and thirst, and the moment he felt inclined to eat and drink, a mouth appeared in him in the first instance. From the mouth came out the palate, in which the sense of taste was produced, and thence were involved the different kinds of tastes, which are experienced by the sense of taste, as well as the deity presiding over the sense of taste. When the cosmic being felt inclined to speak, there emanated from his mouth the god of fire, Agni Deva, the organ of speech itself and the act of speaking, which depends both on the organ of speech and the deity presiding over the same, Agni Deva. Till then, the cosmic being remained underwater, controlling his breath for a pretty long time. When, however, by a pretty long time, we mean hundreds of thousands of years. When, however, his breath sought an outlet and pressed forward, a pair of nostrils appeared in him. And as he felt inclined to perceive smell, there appeared in his nose the olfactory sense, as well as the wind god, Vayudeva, the bearer of smell. When there was darkness all about him, and he felt inclined to see himself and other things, there appeared in him a pair of eyes, the sun god, Surya Deva, and the sense of sight, and thence followed the perception of color. On the Vedas proceeding to awaken him, and on the cosmic being feeling inclined to hear them, there appeared in him a pair of ears, the Digdevatas, the deities presiding over the directions, as well as the auditory sense, itself. And thence followed the perception of sound. When again the cosmic being felt inclined to experience the softness or hardness, lightness or heaviness, and warmth or coolness of objects, there appeared in him the skin, and on the skin there arose the hair. The trees, since trees themselves are the deities presiding over body hair, as well as the wind god, Vayu, since Vayu, who also presides over the sense of smell, presides over touch as well. Nay, the Lord was also covered all over his skin, within as well as without, by the tactile sense, when followed the perception of touch. As soon as the cosmic being felt inclined to perform various acts, a pair of hands grew out of him. In these hands there appeared the faculty of grasping things, and even so Indra, the deva who presides over the faculty of grasping, as well as the act of grasping, which depends both on the faculty of grasping and the deity presiding over it. Even as the cosmic being felt inclined to walk according to his will, a pair of feet grew out of him, and along with them appeared Lord Vishnu, the deity presiding over the feet, Lord Vishnu himself, as well as the faculty of locomotion, with the help of which people procure the materials for sacrifice. So here yajna is given such importance that it's said that the purpose of walking is so that you can get the ingredients to perform yajna. When the cosmic being craved for offspring, sexual enjoyment, and immortality, a penis grew out of him, and even so there appeared in him the faculty of copulation. The god Prajapati, who is the deity who presides over sex, and the pleasure arising from sexual commerce, which depends both on the faculty of coition and the deity presiding over the same, Prajapati. On the cosmic being feeling the urge to void excrement, there appeared in him the anus, and thereafter the faculty of defecation, and then the god Mitra, the deity who presides over the organs of evacuation, as well as the act of defecation, which depends both on the faculty of evacuation and the deity presiding over it. When the cosmic being felt inclined to pass from one body to another and leave the former with that end in view, there appeared in him the navel, and in the navel sprang up the vital air called Apana, and then the god of death, Yamadeva, who presides over the Apana Vayu. And then came about the dissociation of prana from apana, which is death. If prana and apana ever become disassociated from each other, the body dies. Which depends on both the apana air, the apana vayu, and the deity presiding over the same, Yama. On the cosmic being feeling inclined to take food and drink, there appeared in him the cavity of the abdomen, the intestines, and the network of veins and arteries, as well as seas, seas as in like bodies of water, since the deities of the seas are the deities who preside over the intestines, and rivers, since the river deities are those who preside over the blood vessels, which are the rivers of the body. And even so, satisfaction and nutrition, the former of which depends on the intestines and the seas, and the latter on the veins, arteries, and rivers. When the cosmic being felt inclined to contemplate on his own Maya, there appeared in him the heart, and thereafter the mind, then the moon, Somadeva, the deity presiding over the mind, and last of all, volition and desire, the two functions of the mind. From the elements of earth, water, and fire were evolved the seven constituents of the body of the cosmic being: the thick outer skin, the thin inner skin, flesh, blood, fat, marrow, and bone. Even so, from ether, water, and air sprang up his vital air. The senses of perception are all directed towards their objects, and the objects of sense are born of the ego. Mind is the seat of all morbid feelings, while intellect reveals to us the reality of all objects. I have thus described to you the gross form of the Lord. It is enveloped outside by 8 sheaths: earth, water, fire, air, ether, the ego, the Mahatattva, and Prakriti. Beyond this, is the most subtle form, which is unmanifest, unqualified, having no beginning, middle, or end, eternal, and outside the realm of mind and speech. Both the subtle and gross forms of the Lord, which I have described to you, the gross form obviously is possible to describe in much more detail, are the creation of the Lord's Maya. Even the subtle form is. Hence the wise refuse to accept either for the ultimate worship. The Supreme Lord is really actionless. It is by his own Maya that he becomes active. Assuming the form of Brahma, he reveals himself both in the form of word and what it denotes, word and meaning, and evolves many a name and form and activity. Prajapatis, Manus, gods, rishis, the various classes of the ancestors, siddhas, charanas and gandharvas, vidyadharas, asuras and guhyakas, kinnaras, apsaras, nagas, serpents, kimpurushas and snakes, matrakas, rakshasas, pishachas, pretas, bhutas and vinayakas, kushmandas, unmadas and vetalas, yatudhanas and grahas, birds and reptiles, beasts of prey and other animals, trees, mountains, and all other names and forms in the universe, O king, are his. All other creatures, both animate and inanimate, whether viviparous, oviparous, sweat-born, or sprouting from soil, and living either in water, on land, or in the air, are the good, bad, or mixed fruit of corresponding actions done in the past. The predominance of sattva, rajas, and tamas is severally responsible for birth as a god, as a human being, and as a denizen of hell, meaning naraka, or as a member of the subhuman species. Each of these three destinies is again subdivided into three varieties according as each of the three gunas is eclipsed by either of the other two gunas or not. Having assumed the form of Vishnu for the support and sustenance of the world, the same Lord preserves and sustains this universe by appearing from time to time in the guise of animals, men, and gods. Again, when the time comes, the Lord appears as Rudra from the fire of universal destruction and dissolves this universe, once created by himself, even as a blast of wind blows away a mass of clouds. The Lord, who is possessed of inconceivable power, has been described as above. The wise, however, should not regard him only as such, for he is even beyond this description. The Supreme has no doership in relation to the creation and other activities connected with this universe. Sruti texts ascribe it to him only with a view to denying it, for the same has been superimposed on him by Maya. I have told you about the great Kalpa connected with the appearance of Brahma, as also about the other smaller Kalpas. So this is referring to, actually, I was about to explain it, but the Bhagavatam itself explains that. The process of creation is the same in all the Kalpas, the only difference being that during a Mahakalpa, the Kalpa immediately following a Mahapralaya, or final dissolution, in which the universe was more thoroughly destroyed than usual, the whole process of creation begins anew, including even the transformation of matter from the evolution of Mahat down to the crystallization of the five elements. While in the other Kalpas, the Kalpas following not a death of Brahma, but simply a sleep of Brahma, it is only the bodies of the animate and inanimate beings that are created anew. I shall describe in full the measures of time, both gross time and subtle time, the duration of a kalpa and its divisions later on in Book 3. Now hear the story of the Padma Kalpa. Shaunaka said, so we're zooming all the way out to Shaunaka, who is narrating what Sutta said to Parikshit, or what Shuka said to Parikshit. Shaunaka said, Sutta, you told us how Vidura, who was the foremost of the Lord's devotees, left his kith and kin, so very difficult to part with, and traveled on foot to all the sacred places on the earth's surface. Where did he come to have a talk with the sage Maitreya on spiritual topics, and what was the truth that the venerable sage taught to Vidura in response to the latter's queries? Tell us all that story of Vidura, O gentle Sutta, as also the circumstances in which he left his kinsmen and what led to his return. Sutta said, King Parikshit too asked this very question. I now proceed to reproduce to you the discourse that the great sage Shuka gave in response to the king's queries. Thus ends the 10th discourse, entitled The Disposition of the Limbs of the Cosmic Being, in Book 2 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita, a collection of 18,000 verses composed by the sage Veda Vyasa. End of Book 2. But we've still got plenty of time, so I think let's start in and get a little bit into Book 3. So we're kind of taking a slight break from such abstract presentation of philosophy and the process of creation, and it kind of pulls out and goes back to the story of Vidura traveling, and then gets back into spiritual teachings from Maitreya. So, Shrimad Bhagavata Mahapurana, Book 3, Discourse 1, on the meeting of Udhava and Vidura. Sri Shuka said, "It was this very question," on the details of the meeting between Vidura and Maharshi Maitreya, that Vidura asked, on the spiritual teachings, that Vidura asked the worshipful sage Maitreya in the past, when the former had retired to the forest, quitting his prosperous home. It was at Vidura's residence that Lord Sri Krishna, the ruler of the universe, who happened to visit Hastinapura, that was the capital of the Kuru Rajya, the capital of the Pandavas, as an ambassador of your forefathers, called as if it were his own house, refusing the hospitality of the Paurava king, Duryodhana. The king Parikshit said, "Where did Vidura's meeting with the worshipful Maitreya take place, and when did he have a talk with him? Kindly tell me all this, my lord. Surely the question which the pure-hearted Vidura asked of the noblest sage Maitreya could not have been of small consequence, particularly when it was honored with a reply by a saint of no mean order." Sutta continued, "Questioned as above by King Parikshit, and much delighted at heart over this, the all-wise Shuka, the foremost of sages, said in reply, 'Listen.'" Sri Shuka proceeded. "You know how King Dhritarashtra, who was not only blind, but had also lost his right judgment and supported his wicked sons through unrighteousness, had his younger brother's fatherless sons lodged in a house of lac and the same set on fire, so a house of highly flammable materials, in an attempt to murder them. Nay, when in open court his second son, Dushasana, dragged by the hair Dhritarashtra's own daughter-in-law and the spouse of King Yudhishira, whose tears washed off the saffron painted on her bosom, the king failed to stop that abominable act of his son. The guileless King Yudhishthira, who was devoted to truth and regarded none as his enemy, was worsted in a gambling bout by unfair means. But when he returned from the forest to which he was exiled, and asked back his share according to the terms of the agreement, Duryodhana refused to part with it, blinded as he was by infatuation. When Sri Krishna, the preceptor of the universe, was sent by Yudhishthira to the Kaurava court, he spoke there words which were full of nectar to his devotees, Bhishma and others who were there, who were his devotees. But the king Duryodhana attached no importance to them, since all his stock of merits had been exhausted. Meaning that he didn't have the good karma that would impel him to heed the words of Krishna. Again, when invited by his elder brother, Dhritarashtra, Vidura entered the latter's private chamber and was asked to give his advice, that crest jewel of wise counselors gave a piece of advice which politicians still speak of with reverence as Vidura Niti, the counsel of Vidura. Vidura said, "Return the share of Yudhishthira, who regards none as his enemy and who has been tolerating the wrongs done by you, even though they are hard to bear. He is followed by Bhima, whom you are terribly afraid of, and who, with his younger brothers, is hissing in fury as a serpent. The cause of the Pandavas has been espoused by Lord Sri Krishna, the bestower of liberation himself, who is adored as a deity by Yadava chiefs, who is staying at present in his own capital, Dvaraka, having conquered big sovereigns, and who has all the Brahmanas and Devas on his side. It is evil incarnate that has entered your house in the person of Duryodhana, whom you are fostering as a son and who is an enemy of the Supreme Person. That is why you too have turned your face against Sri Krishna and lost your splendor. When it says evil incarnate, it means this literally. Duryodhana was actually an incarnation of the demon Kali, of Kali Yuga itself. Not to be confused with the goddess Kali, which is a totally different name. That is why you too have turned your face against Sri Krishna and lost your splendor. Therefore, in the interest of your race, abandon this unlucky fellow at once. Vidura had a disposition which was coveted even by saints. But when he uttered these words on that spot, the anger of Duryodhana and his companions Karna, Dushasana, and Shakuni knew no bounds. Their lips began to quiver, and Duryodhana insultingly interposed, "Who has called this crooked son of a maidservant here?" It's true, Vidura was a son of a maidservant. Hostilely disposed towards the master on whose crumbs he has grown fat, he works for the enemy's cause. Although his life may be spared, he should be banished from my capital at once. Cut to the quick by these most poignant words, which pierced his ears like shafts in the presence of his brother, meaning his half-brother. They shared the same father. But recognizing the greatness of the Lord's Maya, Vidura did not feel the least perturbed in mind, and quietly left the palace himself, depositing his bow at the gate. Vidura, whose birth in the race of Kurus had been secured as a result of great merit, departed from Hastinapura, and with a view to acquiring religious merit, undertook a pilgrimage to all holy places on the earth's surface, sacred to the Lord whose feet are ever hallowed, and where the Lord resides in 1,001 forms. Accompanied by anyone else, he visited on foot cities, sacred groves, mountains, bowers, rivers, and lakes containing limpid water, meaning shining water, and holy places graced with the Lord's images. He perambulated the earth in the garb of a recluse, so that he could not be recognized by his own people, lived on pure food such as fruits, etc., dropped from trees. In other words, basically fruitarianism, eating only what drops off of plants without even a plant having to be killed. Bathed in all sacred waters without exception, slept on the ground, never made his toilet. This means never dressed himself finely or did his hair or so on. His toilet in kind of the old-fashioned sense of the word. And observed vows that pleased Sri Hari. While he was yet traveling in the land of Bharatavarsha and reached Prabhasa, near Dwaraka, King Yudhishira had established himself with the help of Sri Krishna as the universal and undisputed sovereign of the entire globe. So while Vidura was wandering the land, the whole Mahabharata, the Kurukshetra War took place, and the Pandavas took the throne. And he didn't even know when it happened. He found out afterward because he had just been wandering in the wilderness. So there at Prabhasa, Vidura heard how his kinsmen had perished due to mutual jealousy, even as a thicket of bamboos is consumed by fire produced by the friction of one bamboo against another. Grieving over the Holocaust, therefore, he quietly repaired to the bank of the Sarasvati, where it flows in a westerly direction. On the bank of that river, he stayed at 11 different spots, 11 different holy temples that lined the Sarasvati River, sacred to the memory of, and we list what the 11 temples are to. The sages Trita, Ushana, the father of Shukracharya, the guru of the Asuras, and Asita, that's a half Naga, half human rishi. Swayambhuva Manu, King Prithu, that was an avatar of Vishnu, the god of fire, the wind god, King Sudasa, the cows, one is just sacred to cows in general, Guha, that's the god Kartikeya, or Skanda, and King Sradhadeva, that's Sradhadeva Manu, also called Vaivasvata Manu, and many other sanctuaries in this area, consecrated to Lord Vishnu, founded by holy sages and gods and containing temples that bore on their domes the mark of Sudarshana, the chief of his weapons, the Sudarshana Chakra, the very sight of which reminded one of Lord Sri Krishna, because it's his symbol. Journeying thence through the prosperous land of Saurashtra and the kingdoms of Sauvira, Matsya, and Kurujangala, He reached in due course the bank of the Yamuna, where he came across Udhava, another great devotee of the Lord. Vidura fondly clasped in close embrace this celebrated servant of Lord Sri Krishna, son of Vasudeva, who had attained perfect serenity of mind and was an erstwhile pupil of the sage Brahaspati. So an erstwhile pupil, meaning he was like a pupil of Brahaspati, basically praising how good of a sadhaka he is. He's not literally a pupil of Brahaspati. And inquired of him the welfare of his relations, the proteges of the Lord, the Yadavas, since he himself, Udhava, is a Yadava. He said, Vidura said to Udhava, the two primal persons, Sri Balarama and Sri Krishna, appeared in human semblance on this globe in response to the prayer of Brahma, who was born of the very lotus that had sprung from the Lord's own navel. Having relieved the earth of its burden and brought delight to the whole world. Are they doing well in the house of Shurasena? Dear Udhava, is our brother-in-law, there's a footnote here explaining, since Vasudeva had multiple wives, Vasudeva, Krishna's father, one of his wives, Pauravi, was a cousin of Dhritarashtra. And so Vidura speaks of Vasudeva as his sister's husband, meaning his cousin who is like a sister to him's husband. So that's why he refers to Vasudeva as our brother-in-law. He's being kind of loose about his wide, extended familial relation. Vasudeva, son of Shurasena, quite happy. Vasudeva, who is the greatest friend and well-wisher of the Kurus, and who, like a father, liberally bestows on his sisters the gifts of their choice, bringing satisfaction even to their husbands. Again, dear friend, is that heroic Pradyumna, the generalissimo of the Yadava forces, quite well. Pradyumna, that's the firstborn child of Krishna, who is none other than the god of love, Kamadeva, in his previous incarnation, and whom his mother Rukmini secured from the Lord by propitiating the Brahmanas. Is Ugrasena, the ruler of the Sattvatas, Vrishnis, Bhojas, and Dasharhas, prospering. Ugrasena, whom the lotus-eyed Lord installed on the throne, even though he had stood aloof, having lost all hope of regaining the throne. It's referring to a whole backstory, which we'll hear later. Is Srihari's son Samba, who is the equal of his father and the foremost of car warriors, faring well, O gentle Udhava. Samba, who is none other than the god Guha, whom goddess Ambika bore in her womb in the past, and to whom Jambavati gave birth as a fruit of her religious observances. So Samba, this one of Krishna's sons, is an avatar of Kartikeya, who wanted to take birth as a child of Krishna. Is that Yuyudhana, also named Satyaki, quite happy, who received the secrets of bowmanship from Palguna, that's Arjuna, and who easily secured through the mere service of Lord Adhokshaja, meaning Krishna, the position of his devotees, which is difficult of attainment even for ascetics. Is the wise and sinless Akrura, son of Svapalka, quite healthy. Akrura, who is devoted to the Lord and who, beside himself with love, rolled about in the dust of the road marked with the footprints of Lord Sri Krishna. Is all well with Devaki, who is as good a mother of Lord Vishnu as Aditi, meaning since Aditi was also once a mother of Lord Vishnu in his Vamana avatar, and who bore the Lord in her womb, even as the three Vedas bear the extensive ritual as their import. Sometimes you'll hear references to the three Vedas, sometimes to four. The Atharva Veda is sometimes counted apart from the other three. So if there's a reference to the three Vedas, it means the Rig, Sama, and Yajur Vedas. Is the divine Aniruddha, the grandson of Krishna, perfectly all right? Aniruddha, who grants the desires of his worshippers, like you, and whom the scriptures have declared as the source of the Vedas and the deity presiding over the mind, manas, which constitutes a fourth part of the inner sense. The inner sense meaning the total sense of consciousness that one has, which is divided into the chitta, the ahankara, the buddhi, and the manas. And there are other people, such as Hridika, a Yadava chief, the sons of Satyabhama, Charudeshna and Gada, faring well, O gentle Udhava, people who are exclusively and fully devoted to Sri Krishna, the Lord of their heart. Does King Yudhishira protect the law according to the principles of righteousness with the help of his two arms, Vijaya and Achyuta, that's his brother Arjuna and Krishna? Yudhishthira, at the sight of whose imperial fortune and attendant glory in the court built by Maya, meaning Maya Sura, Duryodhana burned with jealousy. Has Bhima, who is most relentless like a serpent, given up his long-standing grudge against those who wronged him, the Kauravas? Bhima, whose tread the earth could not bear as he moved about on the battlefield, revolving his mace in a variety of ways, referring to the highly skilled and artful way in which Bhima wields a mace in battle. Is Arjuna, the wielder of the Gandiva bow, the most renowned of leading car warriors, now at peace with his enemies? Arjuna, who won the pleasure of Lord Shiva disguised as a Kirata beyond all recognition by hiding him with a volley of his arrows. We're referring to a lot of stories from the Mahabharata here. Do the twin brothers, Nakula and Sahadeva, the foster sons of Pritha, who enjoy the protection of their half-brothers, even as the eyeballs are protected by the eyelashes, rejoice after recovering their ancestral share from the enemy's hands through the arbitrament of war, as though a pair of Garudas had snatched nectar from the mouth of Indra? O Pritha, my sister-in-law, is surviving merely for the sake of her children, though bereaved of Pandu, that foremost of royal sages, who, a matchless hero and foremost car warrior that he was, had conquered all the four quarters with no other companion than his own bow. I feel concerned, O gentle Udhava, for that brother of mine, Dhritarashtra, who is paving his way for hell, inasmuch as he wronged his own deceased half-brother in the person of his sons, and who banished me, his well-wisher, from his capital, having yielded completely to the will of his sons. I am, however, not the least surprised or sorry for his behavior towards me, for it is Sri Hari, the supreme ruler, who bewilders the intellect of men by following the ways of mortals. I am therefore moving about in this world, unperceived by others, observing his glory by his grace. The Lord overlooked the wrongdoings of the Kauravas, though capable of punishing them then and there, for he sought to relieve the distress of those who had taken shelter in him by exterminating with them other monarchs too, who in their threefold pride, pride of birth, pride of wealth, and pride of learning, had strayed from the path of virtue and shook the earth with their armies again and again. The birth and doings of the Lord, who is really birthless and actionless, are only for the extirpation of the wrongdoers, as well as for attracting people towards himself. Otherwise, what man that has transcended the three gunas would tie himself down to a body or pursue an elaborate course of activity? Therefore, O friend, tell me the news about that lord of sacred renown who, though devoid of birth, has descended in the race of Yadu for the good of all the guardians of the different spheres who sought refuge in him, as well of such other devotees as are at his beck and call. Discourse 2. Udhava recounts the childish sports of the Lord. Sri Shuka continued. Thus asked the news relating to his beloved Sri Krishna, that great devotee of the Lord, Udhava, was put in mind of his Lord, and was too overwhelmed with emotion to utter a word in reply. While engaged in worshipping the Lord in his childish play, even as a body of 5, meaning even starting when he was 5 years old, Udhava felt no inclination even to have his breakfast in spite of his mother's call. He didn't want to stop worshipping. Having grown gray in his service by flux of time, how could he answer Vidura's query regarding his Lord, his thought being fixed on his feet, on his Lord's feet? Completely immersed in the nectar flowing from the feet of Sri Krishna, and transported with joy through intense devotion, he remained mute for nearly an hour. The hair stood erect all over his body, and tears burst forth from his closed eyes. Seeing him overpowered with a flood of affection, Vidura came to know that he had realized the object of his life. Udhava slowly returned from the divine realm to this mortal world, and wiping his eyes, replied to Vidura in a tone expressive of wonder. Udhava said, the sun in the shape of Sri Krishna having set, our homes of blighted splendor have been devoured by the python of time. Since Vidura didn't know yet, but Udhava knows that Krishna's avatarana has ended and left the earth. What shall I say then about our welfare? Alas, unfortunate is this world, and more so the Yadus who lived with Sri Hari and yet could not recognize him, even as the fish did not identify the moon. The Sattvatas could read the mind of another through external gestures, were highly intelligent, and lived and sported with him at one and the same place. Yet they accounted him, the abode of all beings, the foremost of the Yadavas alone. In other words, that they regarded him as the foremost of the Yadavas, but most of them did not really regard him as Bhagavan. The intellect, however, of a man who has bestowed his heart on Sri Hari, his own self, cannot be misguided by the words of those who are deluded by the Lord's own Maya, or those who harbor animosity against him. Having shown his divine form to men who had practiced no penance, he has now screened it from their view, even though their eyes were not sated, and thus robbed them of their very sight, as it were, since they have nothing worth seeing left with them. The form which he had assumed in order to reveal the power of his yoga maya, and which was so eminently suited to his pastimes and imitation of men, was an object of wonder not only to the world, but even to himself, a perfection as it was of abounding grace. It was a form whose limbs added to the charm of ornaments, rather than vice versa. Beholding that form, which was the highest delight of all eyes, at the Rajasuya sacrifice of King Yudhishira, the inhabitants of all the three worlds thought that the entire workmanship of Brahma in creating this mortal world had been exhausted in fashioning that form. Feeling honored by his love-laden smiles and jokes and sportive glances, the women of Raja followed him with their eyes and mind and stood leaving their household work half finished. With a mind full of compassion for his gentle forms, Vasudeva and others, that were being persecuted by his wild forms, meaning that he regarded all beings, all humans and all other beings as his forms, but he had compassion for his gentle forms being persecuted by his aggressive and hostile forms. The Lord, who is the ruler both of Prakriti and the manifest creation, though unborn, appeared along with his glorious part manifestation, Balarama, even as fire, which, though present everywhere in a latent form as one of the elements of existence, manifests when something ignites. That he who is unborn should assume the appearance of being born in the house of Vasudeva and dwell in Vraja as if for fear of the enemy, because he hid in the forest lands of Vraja during his youth from Kansa, who was trying to kill him. And that he who is possessed of infinite prowess should himself flee the city, scared as it were by Kala Yavana, puzzles me. That's referring to a time when Krishna retreated from a war. My mind is filled with agony as I recall what he said to his parents, bowing at their feet. Dear father and mother, being in great dread of Kansa, we failed to render any service to you. Therefore be pleased to forgive us. Having inhaled the dust of his lotus feet, what man can ever forget it? Remembering that he is the same Lord who removed the earth's burden by the mere play of his arched eyebrows, who represents the god of death. You must, meaning essentially that it is the most effortless thing for him to destroy whole kings and armies or any foe that he wishes to when he sees fit. You must have seen the consummation attained by Shishupala, who hated Sri Krishna, a consummation which even yogis long to attain through the efficient practice of yoga. I feel like I should explain that a little bit. That refers to in the Mahabharata, Shishupala, a king, in public, right before a bunch of people at the Rajasuya Yagna of Yudhishira, spoke up against Krishna and attacked him. And Krishna killed him on the spot. And visibly to everyone there, the jiva of Shishupala rose out of his body and merged into the body of Krishna. It'll be explained why later in here. Shishupala was an incarnation of a cursed door warden of Vaikuntha Loka, who had to go through 3 births as an enemy of Krishna, along with one other door warden. And that was the end of his 3rd. So that's why he, at that time, got to remerge with Krishna. Who could bear separation from such a benign lord? Similarly, such other heroes of this mortal world as were killed in action by the missiles discharged by Arjuna, while drinking with their eyes Sri Krishna's lotus-like countenance, which ravished all eyes, attained to his abode. In other words, if you had the fortune to be looking at Sri Krishna, who was on the battlefield when you died, you would your consciousness would be so suffused with his beauty and with awareness of him that dying in such a state, you would then go to his realm. Himself the suzerain lord of all the 3 worlds, he is equaled by none, much less surpassed by anybody, and has all his desires satiated by virtue of his own supremely blissful character. Nay, his very footstool is adored by the eternal guardians of the various spheres, with the crest of their diadems while offering their presents to him. Standing before Ugrasena, who sat on his royal throne, he submitted, "My lord, listen," meaning that Krishna bowed before King Ugrasena and called him lord and asked for his favor. That he should thus behave like a servant confounds us, his slaves, to the utmost degree, dear Vidura. Oh, even that impious woman Putana, the sister of the demon Baka, who suckled him at her breast, which was daubed with the most deadly poison with intent to kill him, got from him the destiny appropriate to a foster mother, since she was blessed for having nursed him, even with murderous intent. Is there anyone so merciful, whom we should resort to for protection other than him? I consider even those demons as devotees of the Lord, who had fixed their mind on the Lord of the 3 worlds through anger, and who beheld on the battlefield Garuda swooping on them with Lord Vishnu mounted on his back. In order to bring relief to this earth, the Lord was born of Vasudeva and Devaki in the prison house of Kamsa, the chief of the Bhojas, in response to the prayer of Brahma. Having been removed therefrom to Nanda's Vraja by his father, who was terribly afraid of Kamsa, Nanda's Vraja meaning, Vraja is a kind of forest and pasture land rural territory. It was under the chieftainship of Nanda. That's what's meant by Nanda's Vraja. He, the Lord, lived there with Balarama for 11 years, concealing his glory. In the grove on the bank of the Yamuna, the trees of which were swarmed with warbling birds, the Lord sported in the midst of cowherd boys, grazing calves. He showed childish gestures that were pleasing to the sight of the inhabitants of Vraja, sometimes seeming to weep, sometimes appearing to laugh, and sometimes gazing innocently like a lion cub. The same Lord took to grazing white bulls and cows when he was a little older, that were embodiments of splendor, and entertained with the music of his flute the cowherd boys that accompanied him. Meanwhile, he dispatched in mere sport all those demons sent by Kamsa, who were skilled in Maya and could assume any form they liked, even as a child would smash up its playthings. Having tamed Kalia, a Naga, he revived the cows that had fallen dead by drinking the poisoned water, since the Naga had poisoned the river, and rendered it possible for them to drink its water, which had now regained its purity. In order to make the best use of the abundant riches in the possession of Nanda, the Lord persuaded him to perform with the help of the best of Brahmanas a sacrifice in which cows are worshipped. Blessed Vidura, when Indra, who was enraged at the interruption of his worship because Krishna had called for the Indra Yagna to be cancelled, poured down torrential rains, the Lord protected the inmates of Vraja, inmates meaning people who lived in Vraja, that were much agitated, by holding up the Govardhana hill like a toy umbrella over them, and thus showed his grace to them. Making the most of the evenings, bright with the rays of the autumnal moon, he sang in melodious strains and reveled in the midst of a bevy of young women, gracing them by his presence. Let me see how long this next section is. I think let's do one more discourse because it kind of continues the theme of this one, and then it would probably be a good stopping point. So Discourse 3, a brief survey of the Lord's other exploits. Udhava continued, then, In order to afford delight to his parents, the Lord returned to the city of Mathura, accompanied by Baladeva, and knocking down Kamsa from his high seat and killing him, dragged his lifeless body along on the ground. Having learnt the Vedas along with the sciences subsidiary to the same, the Vedangas, grammar, astronomy, phonetics, prosody, etymology, and Kalpa, or the science dealing with the ritual and laying down rules for ceremonial and sacrificial acts, from Sandipani, his guru, who recited them to him but once, meaning Krishna memorized everything perfectly, having heard it just one time. Of course, he didn't even need to be taught it, but he went through it to honor the institution of gurus and the disciplic teaching of knowledge. He restored to his guru, his dead son by way of the preceptor's fee. So the fee that he paid his guru was to resurrect his son from the dead. After ripping up the belly of the demon Panchajana, trampling on those that had been invited on behalf of Princess Rukmini by her comeliness, that vied with goddess Lakshmi's, and who stood gazing, the Lord carried her away with the intention of marrying her by mutual consent, knowing her as a part manifestation of goddess Lakshmi herself, and as one who had dedicated herself to him to be his own share, even as Suparna, meaning Garuda, carried away the jar containing nectar that he had won. Having tamed bulls whose nostrils had not been bored through, so it was a custom, and still is in many parts of the world, to pierce the bridge of the nose of bulls or oxen so you can tie a rope through it and lead them. That's kind of how ox carts work and such. And it's very difficult to subdue a bull who doesn't have that. But he tamed 7 bulls at once, Krishna did, and married Princess Satya at an assembly of suitors called for the election of a husband by the princess. But when the other assembled princes, who were foolish enough to retain a passion for her, even though their pride had been curbed, took up arms to contend with him, he disposed of them with his own weapons, himself remaining unscathed. Like a hen-packed husband, the Almighty Lord took away from Indra's paradise the celestial tree of Parijata for his favorite consort Satyabhama in order to please her. And on this account, Indra, blind with rage, pursued him with his bodyguards, the 49 wind gods, or the Maruts. For Indra is indeed a toy in the hands of his wives. Seeing her son, the demon Naraka, who seemed to swallow the sky with his body, killed by the Lord's discus Sudarshana, the goddess Earth, the mother of Narakasura, prayed to him for mercy when the Lord bestowed on the deceased's son the portion of his kingdom that had not been annexed, and entered the gymnasium in Naraka's palace. These are all stories that are going to be told in much more detail later. Seeing Srihari, the befriender of the afflicted, the princesses that had been kidnapped there by Naraka sprang on their feet and at once accepted him as their husband through glances that betrayed their excessive joy, bashfulness, and love. Having assumed by his wonderful divine potency an equal number of forms suited to those girls, meaning he multiplied himself so that each of them had a manifestation of Krishna with them, the Lord accepted their hand with due ceremony at one and the same hour, though in different palaces. In order to extend the sphere of his Leela, he begot 10 sons through each of them, sons that were his own images in every respect. When Kalayavana, Jarasandha, Shalva, and others besieged the city of Mathura with their armies, he, Krishna, took the initiative himself and had them killed by his people, lending to them his own divine power, lending to the warriors who fought on his behalf his own power and blessing. Of the demons Shambhara, Bana, Mura, and Balwala, Dvivida, and other warriors like Dantavaktra, some he, Krishna, disposed of himself, while others he caused to be dispatched by other people. Thereafter he brought about the destruction of monarchs who had joined the sides of your nephews, and who made the entire globe rock as they marched to Kurukshetra with their armies. Nay, he did not rejoice even when he saw Suyodhana, that's Duryodhana, with his satellites, meaning with his bodyguards in attendance, lying prostrate on the battlefield, his thigh broken. Suyodhana, who had lost his fortune as well as his life as an outcome of the wicked counsel of Karna, Dushasana, and Shakuni. He said to himself, even though the earth has been relieved of a huge burden, through the destruction of the armies with a total strength of 18 Akshohinis at the hands of Acharya Drona Bhishma. It is yet negligible when compared to the irresistible might of the Yadus, still flourishing under the protection of my part manifestations. Drunk with wine, when they quarrel among themselves, their eyes suffused with blood, that will be the only way of exterminating them, and no other. As a matter of fact, they will disappear as soon as I get ready to depart for my eternal abode. Pondering thus, the Lord securely placed King Yudhishira on his throne and brought delight to his near and dear ones by showing them the way of the righteous. The seed of Puru's line that was duly planted in the womb of Uttara by Abhimanyu, Arjuna's son, and was later torn up by the missile Brahmastra discharged by Ashwatthama, was eventually preserved by the Lord. The Almighty Lord persuaded Yudhishthira to perform no less than 3 Ashvamedhas, 3 horse sacrifices. And the emperor too, devoted as he was to Sri Krishna, led a happy life, protecting the earth with the help of his younger brothers. The Lord as well, who is the soul of the universe, enjoyed the pleasures of life at Dvaraka, keeping to the path chalked out by the Vedas and the Smritis, and remaining unattached to those pleasures in conformity with the spirit of Sankhya Yoga. Delighting this as well as the other world, and the Yadus in particular, by his endearing smiles and loving glances, his words sweet as nectar, his irreproachable conduct, and his person, which was the abode of all charm and splendor, he reveled by night with his consorts, affording them the pleasure of his company and showing them momentary affection. As he thus enjoyed life for many years, he felt an aversion for the performance of religious duties binding on a householder and conducive to the pleasures of sense. What man, then, who is in the power of providence and who seeks to please Sri Krishna through the practice of devotion, would set his heart on the pleasures of sense, which are in the gift of providence? Once, when the youths of the Yadus and Bhojas were playing in the city, in Dvaraka, they offended some, actually near Dvaraka, this was outside the city itself, they offended some sages who in their turn pronounced a curse on the boys, knowing as they did the intention of the Lord, who wanted to bring about the destruction of the Yadus. Some months after that incident, the Vrishnis, the Bhojas, the Andhakas, and others drove in their chariots to Prabhasa with great joy, deluded as they were by the will of Sri Krishna. Having bathed there and propitiated the ancestors, gods, and rishis by offering them handfuls of water taken from that place, they gifted cows possessing many good qualities to the Brahmanas. They further gave away to them gold, silver, beds, wearing apparel, deer skins, blankets, palanquins, chariots, elephants, unmarried girls, meaning that the Brahmanas married some of their women or that they employed them as servants, plots of land as a means of subsistence, and foods containing a variety of tastes, in a spirit of dedication to the Lord. And then those valiant men who lived for the sake of cows and the Brahmanas alone, meaning that they served and protected cows and Brahmins, bowed to them with their heads touching the ground. And I think we can pause there, about the time we normally stop. And the next discourse has a little bit more of this, kind of recapping the Leela of the Krishna avatar, but it quickly changes into Vidura seeking out the sage Maitreya and kind of starts a new subject. So I think that's probably a good place for us to stop today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. You can stop the recording so we can